Professional sports teams have perfected the model for learning high-level skills. So while your salespeople are out practicing on customers, athletes prefer to practice before they play. Well, I wonder if there's anything else that professional sports teams can teach us about training and coaching that we can use to more effectively train our salespeople. Let's find out. This is Sales Untraining, a very different kind of sales podcast. 3 out of 4 salespeople are failing. They're falling short of their revenue. Why doesn't sales training work? That's what this sales podcast is about. It's your weekly sales strategy guide designed to rewire your sales brain. Welcome to Sales Untraining. I'm Kelly Riggs. Great to have you as we start year number 3, episode 105. Thanks for joining me. And if you haven't done so already, I hope you will take a moment to like and subscribe to the podcast. Share it with someone who needs to be a part of the conversation about how we, as sales leaders, do a far better job, or try to, or learn how to do a far better job of training salespeople to make them effective in the field. This week, talking about what we can learn from professional sports teams. Now, sadly, I've already alienated some people because they don't do sports. They don't like sports. Why do you have to use sports analogies? Well, the reason I use sports analogies is, okay, full disclosure, I'm a sports guy, love sports, played sports. Yes, but more importantly, the lessons you learn from people whose very jobs depend on their ability to create effective teams seems to me like maybe everybody'd be interested in that, because if there's something to learn, there is something we can apply to sales teams. I would want to learn it. Wouldn't you? Well, I certainly hope so. You know, it's interesting that, as I mentioned in the open, professional sports teams practice. And they practice a lot. Well, the overwhelming objection I get when I say something like that is, well, they only have to play games once a week, and we have to be in the field all the time. Yes, you're right. So completely invalidates the comparison and the idea that practice is important to perfecting skills. Not. I mean, it's a silly example. It really is silly to say, well, because we have to be working every day, we can't practice. Dumbest thing ever. In fact, let me just go out on a limb and alienate some more people and say, if you don't role play with your sports team, or your sales team, yeah, they're analogous. If you don't role play with your sales team, I wonder about your level of competency. Yeah, now I know you're throwing things, you're screaming at me while you're running on the treadmill. But listen, it makes perfect sense to practice. Don't blame the medium role play because people do it poorly. They set it up wrong. They don't make it real world, and they try to, embarrass people. Of course, that's silly. But there are ways to do role play and to do it extraordinarily well and to create repetitive practice. That is what sports teams do, and their coaches are absolutely dependent upon the performance on the field in order to succeed. Well, exactly like you are, your sales team's performance will ultimately determine how effective you are in your job and how much you get paid and if and when you get to stay. So there are things to learn. I read a LinkedIn post not long ago written by a guy by the name of Mike Dawson, veteran. And it was one of the most poignant posts I've read in some time, because he was making the point that he observed a Fortune 100 company that was doing some weekend leadership training inside of a conference setup, a seminar type of approach. And we need to teach people about emotional intelligence and making decisions and solving problems and those kinds of things. And we need to train our leaders to be effective. He said, in the meantime, while they've spent $200,000 training leaders in this particular approach, they turned down 3 very competent, capable veterans who've already demonstrated their capability to lead under duress, lead under fire, make decisions, solve problems, manage and lead people effectively out in the field, out in the crucible of conflict real conflict. But HR prefers, a certificate from a seminar. I thought his point was really solid. At the same time, it got me thinking about the way we train salespeople and the kinds of approaches we use. Yes, we want to put people in a classroom and lecture style, teach them some techniques, some skills, some ideas randomly drawn out of a hat based on something we're struggling with. And we want to expose people to this concept and then assume that they'll go out in the field, change their habits, and under duress of meeting with a client, they will perform flawlessly. What could possibly go wrong with that idea? Well, having played collegiate sports, or as I oftentimes say, I was on the team. No, I got to play enough to, be present on the field and get a letter and, do all those kinds of things. But in terms of being a high level, athlete at a D1 college level, I was not. Played on a D1 team. How I got on that team defies imagination, but I did. So what I learned from that, things that I took into coaching youth football up to high school football, even a brief stint in a semi-professional team, I learned things about how you coach, train, develop players. And you know what's odd is that sports teams, at least in my experience, and if yours is different, let me know, but I've observed it in a number of places and experienced it firsthand, is when you're training an individual contributor, in my case, a wide receiver, they don't start practice with full-on 11-on-11, full pads, game-style practice. That's not how they start. In fact, every single practice started with individual skills development. The wide receivers would go over here, running backs and quarterbacks over here, defensive line, offensive line, linebackers and defensive ends, defensive secondary, all separated because they need different types of skills. But there was a significant portion of practice that was given to learning specific skills. Now, we always started out just throwing and catching. Now, that would seem a little bit silly, wouldn't it? I mean, you're at the collegiate level, you've played high school, you've played for a long time, and you say you're in your third or fourth year in college, you've been catching footballs forever. Why do we spend a lot of time catching footballs? And not only catching them, but catching them one-handed and catching them diving onto foam mattress kinds of things to be out of control of your body and making catches and having people run in front of you and making catches, focus on the ball every day, every single day. Then, as if that wasn't tedious enough, then we would run routes and we would run them over and over and over and over while catching a football. And then after we've done all of that, we would go to what's called 7-on-7 for wide receivers. So quarterback and running back and wide receivers versus defensive backs and typically linebackers and perhaps the defensive ends, and run what was called 7-on-7 drills, where we're actually now beginning to run against competition, beginning to run our routes against somebody who's trying to prevent us from catching the football and perfecting that, where we've got to learn to read the defense and learn how to run a particular route against a particular kind of defense, a particular kind of coverage. Are you tired yet? Yes, that was every single day. Why? I mean, once you've got it, right? I mean, you've got a good salesperson. They don't need practice. They know what they're doing. They're good at it because they never develop bad habits. They never make mistakes. They never need someone to come alongside and say, did you understand the question? Did you hear when he said this? Did you see the way he reacted to this? No, I mean, because once you're a great salesperson, you don't need any help. Because once you're a Hall of Fame quarterback, you don't need a coach. Well, okay, maybe that's a bad analogy. You understand the idea? What we don't do in the world of selling is we don't practice. And when you're trying to change a habit, listen, understand this. If you observe salespeople in sales calls, they develop certain habits. And once those habits are entrenched, trying to get them to change those habits under fire is very, very, very difficult. And it's impossible if you're not doing it with immense amounts of repetition and practice and someone saying, let's do this differently. Let's change this. Let's approach this scenario differently. Let's ask a different question. I know this is tedious, but we're trying to create high performance sales teams. And if you think you can do that and impart these skills and refine people's abilities and improve to the point they're in the top 10% or 5% of salespeople without these things, then you're just living in a dream world. And the reality is you may be thinking, sales leader, listen, I was a top guy. I was number one in the company. I know how to do it. My objective is to find people who can do it and then just put them on my team. Well, how's that working out? With almost no exceptions, it's not working out very well. There's always an exception, and somebody raises their hand and says, what you're saying is a bunch of garbage because I've done it. Well, I can't train sales teams to an exception. We have to create a methodology that will consistently and predictably produce high-level salespeople. And if we don't do that, then we're relying on luck. Are your salespeople practicing on customers? And if they are, sales leader, that's on you. No, it's not your salespeople's fault. If you have an underperforming sales team, it's not their fault. It's your fault. That should make me some friends. Well, how can you say that? Well, simple. Let me ask you 3 questions. Who hires your salespeople? You do. Who trains them? You do. And who is their leader responsible to develop the culture and environment in which they can thrive? Oh, that's you. So you hire them, you train them, you lead them, but they're not very good. It's their fault. You're like, well, yeah, it's their fault. They're not performing. Question is, why are they still on your team? Why did you hire someone who's not capable and effective? Why aren't they trained to the level of their potential? That all falls on you. Until you look at the way you develop salespeople very, very introspectively from your perspective of what do I need to do different, your team is never going to improve. Well, coming up next, let's take a look at why most companies' sales training has a record worse than those New Orleans Saints or those New York Jets. Stay with me. Hey, thanks for making Sales Untraining your first listen of the week. And if you find something you like, if you hear something that's interesting, I hope you'll share it with somebody you know. You can find out more about me at bizlockerroom.com or email me, kelly@bizlockerroom.com. Now back to the show. So salespeople work forever to get an audience with a decision maker, and they have to spill their guts, and they feel like they have to do everything in one single call because, Kelly, I might not get another bite at the apple. My friends, if you have credibility and if they have interest, the only thing you need is to schedule the next conversation. If they're unwilling to do that, you haven't gotten anywhere. But if you have gotten somewhere, they will schedule the next conversation, which has to be pertinent. It has to be important. It has to address further things that are on the table to be discussed. But that's the only thing you're trying to get early on, is you're trying to create credibility that leads to some level of trust that will enable them to schedule the next call. Welcome back to Sales Untraining. Hey, let me thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying through the break, listening to the second segment. Many times, a lot of the really good stuff is in the second segment. Glad you're here. As we talk about utilizing professional teams as a model for sales training. Is there things to learn? I think absolutely there is. And I think what we learned specifically from professional teams is you need to do it a lot. You need to be repetitive. You need to practice until it becomes a habit. Therein lies the problem. That's why most sales training is grossly ineffective, because we're not actually training people. No, hang on, stay with me. We're not training people. Let me tell you why. Most sales training, not all, but most sales training tends to be one-off and periodic. In other words, we do it at a sales kickoff meeting, or we have a day-long sales training meeting, and it's a couple 3 hours of something, and then there's no repetition, there's no follow-up, there's no coaching, there's no development. My friends, that is not called training. That's called exposure. Training is when I teach someone something they don't know, and so I have to expose them to the concept, but that exposure and taking them through an hour or 2 hours of understanding of what this new concept is and refinements to it or whatever, that's exposure to a concept. But until we get into the mode of coaching, reinforcing, and repetition, then the chances that they're going to master that habit, and even more importantly, that they're going to utilize it under pressure, is essentially non-existent. Under duress, and listen, I've done this for a very, very long time, and I've witnessed, I can't even, countless numbers of sales calls, countless number of role play calls, and when people get in their head and they have to start thinking about what they're doing, then they will typically resort to what they've done in the past that is ingrained in their habits. Right there, some years ago, I think it was in the 60s, at the New York University, there was this model that was introduced. I may have mentioned it before, but it bears repeating. The conscious competence model. And learning starts with unconscious incompetence. In other words, I don't even know what I don't know. I don't even know what I'm not good at because I've never been exposed to it. So if I've never had any training on any particular thing, presentation skills, discovery skills, dealing with negotiation, all those kinds of things. If I've never been exposed to it, I don't know what to do, and I don't even know that I don't know what to do. So when I get exposure to it, then we elevate ourselves to what that model then calls conscious incompetence. I'm aware that I'm not very good at this. I'm aware that this is a new technique or skill or concept that I'm trying to master. And yet that exposure does not make me good at it. And therein lies the problem, is that most sales training looks exactly like that. Here is the skill. Here is a lot of details, a lot of classroom learning. In some cases, there may even be some examples or someone demonstrating how to do it. Rarely is there progressive practice and repetition. Until that happens, we can't progress to what's called then unconscious competence. We have to progress through conscious competence, which means I'm aware of it and I'm getting pretty good at it, but I still have to think about it and I still have to go through my head and get inside my head and think about steps or models or whatever the case may be until I practice it enough. And then I'm unconsciously competent. I don't think about it. I just do it. I just respond. I integrate the habits that I have now developed, new ones, into my behavior. I don't have to think about it. Think about golf. If you've never played golf, you don't know what a chip or a putt or a drive looks like. I mean, you've seen it on TV or whatever, but you have no idea how to do it. So you're not aware of the techniques and the skills and the things that you have to do. So you're unconsciously incompetent, but you go out and take a few lessons and you think, wow, this is way harder than I thought it was. I thought you just picked up a club and swung it, hit the ball, bam, and it went, where it's supposed to go. Clearly that's not true. So you keep practicing and you get more coaching and you get more repetition. Or if you're like me, who by the way is terrible at golf, you never do any of those things and you can't understand why playing 3 times a year, you can't shoot in the 80s, even though you don't practice and you've not gotten coaching, right? But if you do that enough, you get to the point where you're consciously competent. What does that mean? Consciously it means you have to think about it. You still approach the ball, you still go through the steps, you still think about swing plane and arm position and hip turn, all that stuff. And if you do it enough times, you get to the point where you can step up and you just automatically go through the steps and you hit the ball consistently. Doesn't mean you don't make mistakes. That's why you still need a coach. I mean, think Tiger Woods. How many times did he redo his swing? And how many times did he, get off in a certain arena? And every professional golfers like this. They need a coach. Until we as sales leaders change our perspective of sales training and understand that exposure is not learning, and it takes repetition, practice, and time to master particular skills, and that responsibility is on me to provide that kind of practice, then we're going to run into all kinds of trouble. The challenge is that our expectations for learning are completely out of whack. Well, we had sales training on fill in the blank. I mean, we provided sales training. We provided the training. I mean, what are you doing? Why aren't you good at it? Why haven't you adopted these habits? Why aren't you capable and competent in these skills? Those expectations are completely out of line with learning, because learning is about habit changes. Habit changes do not happen just because you're exposed to something new. Hey, I hope that helps. I hope you'll go back and start to look very closely at how you train salespeople. This is Sales and Training. I'm Kelly Riggs. I'll see you next time.
Sales on Training is a production of Business Locker Room and Pod About It Productions. Music and editing by Doug Branson. To get more Kelly, visit bizlockerroom.com.